As we've been reporting, an inquest is currently underway in Winnipeg into the shooting death of 16-year-old Eishia Hudson. Hudson was shot and killed by a Winnipeg police officer in 2020 following a high-speed car chase prompted by an alleged liquor store robbery. Our weekly Truth in Politics panel is here for more on this. Also this week, the Conservative Party convention and pop star Billie Eilish's stolen land comment at the Grammys. Joining me is Jennifer Laewetz, the CEO of Paskwâw Strategies, and Niigaan Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Niigaan, great to have you with us. Niigaan, we'll start with you and the ongoing inquest into the death of Eishia Hudson, killed by a Winnipeg police officer in 2020 following a high-speed pursuit and alleged liquor store robbery. What's your take on what we've heard so far?
So the first thing I guess people really should know is that this is an inquest. This is not a seeking of trying to find where the guilt lies, although certainly that may come evident as the hearings continue. This is about trying to come up with some kind of method of prevention or examine the systemic causes which led to the shooting of Eishia Hudson by Winnipeg police. Two things that have come out very clear in the hearings. The first is that Winnipeg police clearly felt pressured to do something about the spate of alleged liquor store robberies that were taking place. And so they felt that they needed to be aggressive, and they needed to be aggressive in a kind of public response. The second is that the Winnipeg police officers, what they're claiming to be a situation in which they felt threatened by Eishia behind the wheel of the car, the video evidence does not support that. It certainly suggests that there was a different, perhaps, reason why she was shot behind the driver's wheel. In fact, it just is so eerily similar to the situation in Minneapolis, in which you're seeing police officers saying one story and the actual people who are taking the video showing a much different scenario. It's a lot of very eerie similarities to what we're seeing in the States, and so it's hard not to notice that. And what I hope is that the public's really keeping an eye on this, because what you're beginning to see is you're seeing a police force that is responding to what has been a post-pandemic kind of sense of Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations as being rather at odds, quite in conflict.
Jennifer, an inquest of this nature does not assign blame, but is looking at what role, if any, systemic racism may have played and whether the use of force was necessary. The officer who fired the shots has already been cleared of any criminal charges. Why do you think an inquest like this is still important?
Well, inquests into things like this are incredibly important. I talk about this on social media often when it comes to state power and the use of state power against citizens, is that, yes, this is not a trial, but this is the fact-finding process, and it needs to be part of that process after any time, again, police and government and anything that's a branch of it uses, state power against the people and any force. So that exactly what Niigaan said is we can find out exactly why that happened and what recommendations can come from that. And in instances like this, recommendations can include, reviewing high-speed pursuits, how we use force against youth, and all of those different types of things. So I think that this is really important, but it's not just about doing the inquest, because we have inquests all the time, when there's people that are, passing away in jail and people that are passing away at the hands of police. But whether or not we actually take those recommendations and we actually, put them into action, because we hear about this all the time where there's inquests, and often they're very lengthy. They require a lot of resources and all of those things. But we need these bodies and our governments and our institutions to actually take those recommendations seriously and see that systemic change.
Yeah, Niigaan, like Jen says, look at the Phoenix Sinclair inquest, the largest, most expensive in provincial history, and many of those recommendations never touched. What are your hopes? What are you expecting to come out of this inquest?
I ran into one of the members of Eishia Hudson's family just a couple days before the inquest had happened. And this family member who shared with me that they were very optimistic that not so much for the inquest itself and the fact that the recommendations will probably not followed up, but there's certainly to indicate that there's a great deal of gaps in problems, systemic issues. And just if you look at Eishia Hudson's life, it wasn't really about that day. It was about all the things that had failed her up to that point, and including the training of those officers. And so the fact is that there was a number of failures that have systemically have led to a kind of acrimonious relationship between Indigenous young people in particular, and then also the fact that she's two-spirit, and the way that she's dressed or the way that she's presented and the ways that the officers perceived her. A whole bunch of different things that are going to come in. But the family member said that it's not really so much about the inquest that we're so concerned about. It's the fact that we'll hear the discussion of what happened to Eishia, what her life story was, and most importantly, that she was a human being, a beautiful human being that we are all less than now that she's gone. And so that perhaps might be the biggest story here, is that we must never forget that this young person who had such promise and such opportunity and hope and had been just taken so tragically from us, and for reasons that are really very solvable. They should never have happened in the first place.
Jen, wanted to move on to the Conservative convention where you did pay to get in last week. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, political conventions are always a little bit weird, especially if you're Indigenous, and obviously there's going to be criticism online, especially being an Indigenous woman that shows up in a space like that. I've always been vocal about the fact that, the Conservative Party represents the majority of Saskatchewan. Up until last election, every single seat was Conservative. And I often remind people that, number one, no political party owns us, but our representation in all of those spaces is still very important, because we shouldn't go in with the idea of how do I take this and sell it to people, but rather how do I take what issues matter to us and why we should be included in these spaces and bring it there. And I saw a prime example of this over the last few days, where the Conservatives have gone pretty heavily under fire about the conversion therapy vote that happened a couple years ago, which they pivoted on. That came up again at convention, where there was a policy to reopen that debate, and it was narrowly defeated. And that's one of those areas where it's like, that is why representation and the diversity of people in politics is so important, because had the people that were against that type of issue and reopening the conversion therapy vote not attend, that might have passed, and that might have ended back up into the policy directive and might have been an issue on the Conservative Party's agenda if they ever form government. So those are those areas where, it does matter for us to be there, but I won't lie, it is really tough in 2026 to show up in spaces where we know that we have so many big issues nationally right now that we're trying to navigate, and then you go to a political party convention for one of the biggest political parties and none of those things are mentioned. It's like, how can a government be ready, or how can a party be the government in waiting until it gets to that point where it's ready to address those things?
And Jennifer did a whole op-ed on her experience at the Conservative convention. You can read that now over on our website, aptnnews.ca. Niigaan, Billie Eilish, the pop star, has made a lot of headlines this past week for her Grammy Award speech, where she said that no one is illegal on stolen land. This has sparked varying reactions, including from the Tungva tribe, whose land her multi-million-dollar property sits on. What's your take?
I'm going to do something totally unprecedented, and maybe we should mark this in my career as something I never thought I would do. I'm going to agree with Kevin O'Leary, who appeared on Fox News and said, movie stars, celebrities, musicians, they should probably do some Google searches before they start making these grandiose statements. It's not only a heavily clunky statement. It actually took me a little while to figure out, what does it really mean that no one is illegal on stolen land? I guess I get the sentiment, Indigenous land is stolen. In Canada here, about 98% of the land has been unjustly taken with no or absolutely little to no reparations there, or restitution or even recognition in many corners of the country. That land was unjustly taken from Indigenous peoples during a sham process that has often been dressed up to look like treaty, but was never intended to be a treaty. When musicians, movie stars, celebrities start wading into very heavily nuanced issues and then making grandiose statements, what they do is they end up obscuring the issue. They end up creating a bit of confusion around it. And then people then sort of go, well, maybe the whole entire left-wing, anti-government, and these days, democratic views are not informed. And what you do is you really give a lot of ammunition to your political enemies to point out that not only are you poorly informed, that you don't know that you yourself have benefited from stolen lands. And I also understand she's also had people who she's then said, get off my property, or you're a trespasser. I mean, like the ironies are abound. But then you give all this ammunition to those who then can discredit not just you, but then also all the other things that you wish to say when you actually are informed on issues.
Jen, I know the Grammys is one of your favorite nights of the year. You're a huge music fan. What do you think of what she had to say and the fallout since?
Well, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite things. I think it's always fun to watch the people on TV and wonder how you got so old so quickly and don't know any of them. But I think, the Grammys are becoming an increasingly more popular space to almost grandstand in. And even this time around, we saw, the pins that said ICE out and things like that, which it's so frustrating to be like a grassroots person that's trying to talk about democracy and how state force needs to be questioned, and state force can be of concern and should always be of concern, and all of those things. And then these high level celebrities just come in with pins that say ICE out, but they're trying to talk about the use of authority and government authority. But if I walk up to any of them, unprovoked and unwelcome, they're going to call the police on me probably immediately. So it's really hard to connect how all of these really high level people, which granted they are, they're celebrities, they're stalked and they're harassed on a daily basis, but they go into these spaces where they're all protected and all of their security is waiting outside in their black limousines and life is great, and they're lecturing to everybody else. And that's, again, celebrities are completely disconnected from what feels like reality, and it's hard to just sit there and listen to somebody talk about how nobody is illegal on stolen land. But it's like, yeah, but if I enter your property, you yourself are going to do something about it. So, yeah, I don't know. The whole thing is just odd, and but Reba McEntire was there, and I love Reba, so.
I had commented myself online that Reba, first time at the Grammys, she sold 90 million albums, but just having her now. And I was kidding. I didn't think you actually watched the Grammys. Okay, well, thanks to you both. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks.